To finish off the session on green construction, green real estate and development, we have Richard Hilder from Precinct Properties. He's the CFO there. He's also the chair of the Sustainability Committee, and he's going to be talking to us about TCFD reporting, which is becoming mandatory in New Zealand, and also Precinct's recent green bond issuance. So thank you, Richard. Take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I'm not sure if you can see me, but good morning from Auckland, and apologies for the haircut. It's a little bit long. I've been asked to talk about TCFD and our green bonds experience. But before I delve into that, I might just touch on our kind of general wider approach to sustainability. So we follow what's called GRI, or Global Reporting Initiative, as a framework for setting our sustainability. And within that, we've kind of defined it between our people and partners. That covers our staff and our community, and also health and safety across, in particular, our developments. Developing, so the design of our assets, and then operational performance. So today, in relation to TCFD in particular, that only touches on two elements out of the set, which is sustainable design and building operational performance. How does TCFD and green bonds principles, which we've used for our green bonds, fit within our reporting? There are many different kind of regimes of sustainability reporting. These are the ones that are kind of generally recognised. Everything in the dark kind of black boxes is what Precinct reports against. And where TCFD fits is more of a framework around how to report, and in particular, how to report emissions and also kind of climate risks. It doesn't go wider than that. It doesn't touch on diversity, for instance, of your workforce, or health and safety, where other scoring or frameworks might touch on that. Importantly, TCFD is starting to kind of bleed into other scoring and other frameworks, which is really important. There is a lot of reporting that we have to undertake, which is an expectation from not just our board, but also in particular our investors. They want to see us improve our scores and have best practice disclosure, so that the more that these different regimes align with one another, the better. If we drop down to scoring, our key measures there that we use internally are our GRISP score in CDP, which also kind of reference TCFD. In terms of sustainable finance, there's generally two kind of regimes that are established. One is the Green Bonds Principles, and the other is the Climate Bonds Initiative. We have chosen to go with the Green Bond Principles, and I'll explain that choice later on in the presentation. The other ones below that are generally property-related measures and ways in which we measure our operating performance. First off, I guess, what is TCFD? TCFD has been around for about 5 years now. And the purpose of it was to develop a way of consistent reporting across all companies. And I think it's a very clear, concise kind of regime that's been established. It's split across 4 different elements, which are listed there on the screen. And within each of those 4 elements, there's about 11 questions that need to be answered within that set. Importantly, what's great to see is that it's been picked up by a number of different agencies or reporting regimes, and XRB is one of those, and that will be something that will be compulsory and mandatory change for large companies in New Zealand in the next few years. which is really encouraging for external stakeholders, in particular, investors, insurers in particular, to actually assess kind of climate risk on a standardized basis, which is fantastic. Precinct reported against TCFD for the first time last year. We did that on a voluntary basis. Our plan is in the middle of next year, once the XRB reporting has been finalised, to actually do a kind of internal audit exercise of our disclosure against the TCFD best practice to see where our gaps may be. So the first part of TCFD is the governance regime, and that is how an organisation goes around essentially overseeing the risks that the business has. There's two aspects of that, of course. One is board and one is the management team. At Precinct, we've committed to this in a big way. We've recently changed the structure of the business, and that's enabled us to create a new board committee. And we have our first meeting in a couple of weeks now, which is fantastic for the business, and I think that will drive us forward at a rate of knots. Before that, though, we've been reporting on climate risk for a few years now to the Audit and Risk Committee, and that's set within our standard set of papers, along with all of our other risks that the business may have, and those are discussed on a quarterly basis. The key area of when we look to set sustainability strategy and look at emission reduction plans is actually on an annual basis, and we undertake that in our business planning review, which is undertaken in about May of every year. In terms of the management team, about 5 years ago, I picked up sustainability as part of my role, and have been kind of leading it through for Precinct as part of that. One of the first things that we did was set up a sustainability committee, and that's been the most helpful aspect of what we have achieved in terms of driving the success that we have as a business. And that's been across the whole business. It's just not one team. It's our development team, our facilities team, it's our property team, and they've given us a huge amount of insight across the business. Importantly, our remuneration, our key KPIs are linked to sustainability, and that varies depending on the team. So for my targets each year, it is linked to more the high level targets. So that might be CDP performance or the GRIS scores that we achieve. Undertaking initiatives like the TCFD disclosure last year, where someone like a facilities manager who's more focused on the buildings is much more granular, and that's towards achieving kind of NABERS NZ ratings for the buildings that they manage. One of the key changes this year that we're looking to implement is having someone dedicated to drive ESG who will report to me, which again will, I think, lead to great success for us. The second part of TCFD is strategy. So this is effectively a section that is there to disclose what are the risks of the business, what are the opportunities for the business, how does the business define timeframes, what is medium term, what is long term, and all of these are quite different to the businesses that operate. They don't need to be the same, but you need to have disclosed how you have derived those risks and how you've derived the timeframes that are relevant to you. Also, one of the key aspects of TCFD is what are the material risks, not listing out 24 risks, but really concentrating on those that are the most relevant to those external stakeholders. The risks are broken down into two large categories. One is the transition risks. So those are the kind of movement from where we are today to a low carbon economy. So that might be your customer base and where their demand is leading. It might be regulatory, either at a local government or at a central government, and where again their direction is going. Physical risks are a little bit easier to understand, but within that, again, there's two types of risks. There's the risks that are long-term, chronic. They're the ones that you read about more often in the newspapers. Sea level rise, for instance, is an obvious one for that. Acute is something that is not discussed as much, but is something that has been appearing more and more in the news in the last 12 months in particular. Events like in Canada with the flooding that they experienced outside of Vancouver, London floods, the floods in Europe and wildfires in California. Those are the types of events that acute is meant to be covering. In terms of time frame, Precinct's definition of time frame is listed on the slide there. And look, we've had a lot of thought into what that means. Short term in particular is a focus to us, and I'll touch on that when we get to the risks section, but certainly a number of our customers are focused on climate change. Our physical risks, I've mentioned a few of them. These are what we would describe our material ones: sea level rise, the rising temperatures, and those acute extreme events. And within the disclosure, we need to talk about what is the likely impact. Is it material? Is it what's the size of it? And what is the driver of that change? And how will it impact our assets or revenue? So rising sea levels, for instance, that could impact assets that we have close to the coast here in Auckland and in Wellington. But also it might be assets that are impacted by a loss of infrastructure. So it might be, for instance, the rail network in Wellington that's impacting the Wellington CBD. Alternatively, there might be impacts to revenue. So those revenue impacts could be driven from the two on the right-hand side there, so mean temperatures or the severity of events. And both of those could have impacts on our maintenance capex going forward, more repairs of the buildings because of events, or a higher load on the mechanical systems of our buildings as temperatures increase in Auckland, for instance. Transition risks is probably one of the larger risks that our business and I think the industry has, and it's developing at quite a rate. There are a lot of changes in this space that are coming, driven a lot by a few aspects. The zero carbon bill, I think that's going to lead to changes into the building code and the RMA around having more positive obligations of energy efficiency in carbon emissions. MB has also focused in this space, and they sought consultation last year from the industry, in particular around having mandatory energy certificates for office buildings, and also for development. So how do you develop a building within and having a understanding of the embodied carbon of your development? And they have proposed ideas around having kind of development caps, for instance, that you have to abide by. So these are things they are exploring. And then the other aspect that's currently in consultation at the moment is the Ministry for Environment and their carbon emissions reduction plan, which is a national plan. I think that's going to have quite significant changes to the industry moving forward for the next 15 years. They're generally set, from my understanding, at 5 yearly reduction budgets. And those policies will impact how we develop assets, how we manage assets, and they're going to cover, a lot of areas that will require some remediation and replacement of older kind of plant and equipment within our buildings. And again, one of the larger impacts here is customer behaviour, and we're already seeing that within our corporate base, and also we've got government changing how they how and where they want to occupy buildings, and they have a focus on neighbours NZ, which is fantastic, something that we have been reporting to for a while, but they want to be in energy efficient buildings moving forward, and that the same is for corporate. So in every RFP we have, there will be a question around the sustainability performance of our assets. One of the other aspects of TCFD is opportunities. So a key opportunity that exists for Precinct and in the industry is technology, and how that evolves and how do we incorporate that within our buildings. Some examples of that are our use of the facade. There is technology to have effectively PV facades. Other uses might be to remove gas from our buildings, or alternative products, which we're exploring in this render. This is a Wynyard building that we're looking at to commit to at the end of the year, and that's going to be partly built out of the cross-laminated timber, which is the first time that we've done that. The third step of TCFD is risk management, and that's how do you kind of process, what's the process for identifying those risks, and how do you quantify the costs? I won't go into the detail here. I'm quite conscious of your time, but largely transition risks are just through our involvement with talking to clients, surveys, talking with our peer group, and being involved in government policy. In terms of physical risks, it's a little bit more detailed, and we use GRISB, which is an independent provider, to assess our buildings' resilience against climate change, both the changes which are acute and also the chronic. You'll see there in the table the two highlighted deep blue colours there. Those are chronic risks, and the lighter blue are acute. And it's quite clear, it's very helpful, and it's been immensely important to quantify it independently from rather than a management perspective. There are improvements that need to be made within our reporting and our understanding. One of those is the cost of climate risk, the cost to achieve the reduction plans that we want to implement, and those are aspects that we want to improve on the next over the next 12 months. The last aspect of TCFD is how do you actually report and how do you disclose? We've got a number of targets that we established about 4 or 5 years ago. Those are listed there. Again, really important to have them independent as much as you can. And this is something that we're really proud of what we've achieved in quite a short period of time. We have been reporting emissions within our reporting for the last about, again, 4 or 5 years, and have seen quite significant reduction in carbon intensity of our portfolio. Importantly, the scope 1, which are probably the worst emissions that we could have as a business, we've reduced that intensity by about 20%. And we have also secured for next year and beyond zero carbon emissions for our scope 2 electricity, which is important for the business. This is an area of immense focus, but also we are looking at how we measure our developments. So developments as a kind of annual percentage or quantity of emissions is quite large for Precinct. We do a lot of development within our strategy, And in the last 2 years, we've moved to actually better understand that. And we are now measuring our embodied carbon for our projects, which account for about 30% of the whole life cycle of a building. And we have been offsetting that within our project feasibilities. It's also worth noting that when it comes time to do it, at the time of development, it's too late to actually make changes to the operational emissions. The best time to do it is in the design stage, and that's when you're going to make the biggest impact to actually reducing the overall emissions of a building over its, say, 60-year lifespan. Our progress to date, as I've mentioned, I think we've had, over a short period of time, a really good improvement, particularly in our disclosure. We're now disclosing against an A rating in our GRIS score, and we've improved a lot of our measures of how we report against emissions. There are improvements to be had, and we're currently reviewing that at the moment, and setting potentially more aspirational targets, in particular committing to the zero carbon 2030 NZ Green Building Council commitment as a target I think we should make as a business. The last aspect of the presentation that I've been asked to touch on is just our green bonds. So we greened our portfolio at the end of last year, and we chose the green bond principles out of the two kind of reporting methodologies, and that was largely to create consistency in the debt capital market in New Zealand. Argosy, Kiwi and Precinct now all report against that same standard, so it's very easy for investors to understand that and compare the bonds on the exchange. The components of the reporting and how to become green bond kind of certified are pretty easy to understand, and effectively it goes back to those independent verifications of Green Star and Neighbours NZ. We define green assets as meeting excellence levels, so that's 5-star Green Star or 4-star Neighbours NZ. We've achieved about $300 million of green bonds out of total debt facilities of about $1.6 billion, and we're looking to grow that over the next few years. I'd have an aspiration to having our entire debt book green at some stage, and there's certainly demand from our banking group to see us do that. A question I heard on the previous presentation was, what is the kind of pricing benefit or of a green financing? At this stage, there's not a lot. BNZ with Canyon News did a survey at the start of this year around what is that premium. And look, most investors said there's not much benefit we'd be willing to give you as a new as a green issue. But what I would say is the graph to the left there, which is hard to read, effectively, it's basically saying if you're not a green issuer, it's going to be much harder for you to come to market, and you'll be probably paying a premium for being a dirty issuer, which is quite interesting. The last aspect of this is there was certainly more demand that we had as a business with our green bonds. There were more institutional investors on our most recent bond that we did in about May of this year, and accounts that we hadn't had on our previous bonds that we had done, and that it was purely to do with the asset being green. So it certainly increased the pool of investors, but probably didn't improve our pricing at this stage. Thank you. That is the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Richard. And a good wee graph to finish on. We're now going to have a almost 15-minute break. We're going to go grab a cup of tea and maybe a coffee. And Roy, if you're still there, would you like to come on and put that video on for everyone else during the break? And then we'll be back at 11 a.m. to start the direct impact and iwi investing in New Zealand session. Also in the break, you may, if you're on Zoom, you may see a couple of polls pop up and ask you some questions to get some insights from our audience. So with that, thank you all, and we will see you in about 13 minutes to continue the day.